Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and in this video we're building another one of my favorite things, a dresser. So this project is actually a redo of a previous project that I just wasn't 100% happy with. A few months ago, I shared a new bedroom set that included a storage bed, a matching nightstand, and a 6-drawer dresser. After I built that dresser, I mentioned in the video that I wish I had gone with a 9-drawer version instead. So let's try this again. I'll dive more into a few of the design specifics later in the video, but if you're ready to see how this 9-drawer dresser version came together, let's go. Just like the previous dresser, I assembled this one from solid red oak and red oak plywood. I made the legs of the dresser 2x3s and the top and bottom framing 2x2s. I couldn't find red oak 2x3s pre-cut at the store, and it was a lot cheaper to buy a 2x4 than 2x2s. So I started by cutting down my 2x3s from a 2x6 and my 2x2s from 2x4s. I saved these leftover strips from the cuts to use for trim later. Of course, if you don't have a table saw, you can use pre-cut 2x2s and just go with full 2x4s for the legs. Once these pieces were cut down, I laid them out on my workbench and marked them at each joint to drill dowel holes. I needed to mark both sides of the frame, so I carefully labeled each mark just to keep my pieces straight. Once all the dowel holes were drilled, I assembled the frame with wood glue and dowel pins. This frame was pretty wide, so I ended up having to double up on clamps, which reminds me that I need to remember to grab some longer pipe clamps pretty soon. Once the first frame was assembled, I repeated to make another one identical to it. One will be for the front of the dresser and one will be for the back. From here, pretty much everything is cut from plywood, so I started breaking down my sheets. This dresser needs about 2.5 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, and I've provided the full cut list and cut diagrams in the printable plans that I've linked below. From this first sheet, I ripped a strip down to cut the top and one of the side panels. Then, from what was left of the sheet, I cut a large piece to use for continuous grain drawer fronts. Then I cut down the second side panel. Now, I won't bore you with all of the rest of the cuts, but I really just wanted to mention that large piece for the continuous grain drawer fronts because we will come back to that later. I also cut down several plywood strips for drawer dividers and edge banded all of the edges that will be exposed in the finished project. I used pocket holes and screws to assemble the rest of the dresser frame, but if you wanted, obviously, you can use another joinery method, whichever one you prefer. First, I tied the front and the back pieces together by attaching the side panels between them. Then I installed dividers at the front and the back. These pieces will just kind of separate the left, middle, and right drawers. On the front side, I used a Craig multi-mark tool to help me position these dividers so that they were a 1/4 inch inset from the front edge when I attached them. This just added some extra dimension to the design. But now I needed to add some runner strips to be able to mount the drawer slides onto. So I cut 12 strips to run between these, front to back. Now, you may be wondering why I chose to make these dividers so wide. It does kind of waste a few inches of potential drawer space, but I made them wide to match the wide trim design on the head and footboard of the matching bed. This is also why I didn't equally divide the sections. On the bed, the middle section is wider, so I just kind of tied that into the dresser design as well. So I've got the drawer dividers here, and I drilled standard size pocket holes in the 2 long ones that'll go in the middle, but I feel like these are kind of big. They'll work fine. I'm just concerned about like the possibility of splitting. I'm gonna use the micro pocket hole jig, which I've talked about this before, but it just makes smaller pocket holes. Definitely not necessary. I think just like kind of helpful in especially something like this. Once all the drawer slide runner pieces were in place, I added a few more dividers to separate each individual drawer. Now, one thing I had to pay super careful attention to when adding these was that I inset them another 1/4 inch from the middle dividers, which meant that they needed to be a 1/2 inch inset from the front legs. Now, personally, I like the look of these added dividers, but in hindsight, design-wise, these kind of take away from the whole matching thing. I think this may have matched a little truer if I had not added them. So I don't know whether I should or shouldn't have added them, but I did. Next up was adding the drawer slides. Now, I've got a whole separate video on installing drawer slides if you'd like more specifics, but I installed 9 pair of slides into the dresser. I again used my multi-mark tool to set these back from the middle divider about 1 1/4 inches, which meant that the ones on the side panels needed to be set back about 1.5 inches. Adding that extra dimension with these dividers was a bit of a pain. Now it's time for my favorite part, building the drawers. But before adding all of that extra weight to this frame, I made a couple of simple supports to just help prevent any sagging. Basically, I glued and screwed a couple scrap pieces of 2x3 to some scrap plywood and placed these underneath the bottom drawer slide supports. These will hopefully help keep it from looking like a banana once 9 drawers of added weight are installed. Now it was time for the drawers. You don't realize how much plywood it takes to make 9 drawer boxes until you actually start cutting it all down. I used a full sheet plus a little extra to make all 9 boxes. After I ripped my plywood into strips, before cutting the actual drawer box sides to length, I cut dados in the strips for the 1/4 inch plywood drawer bottoms. I have another video on how to size and build drawer boxes that I will link below with more specifics, but once these dados were cut, I trimmed these strips down into 36 pieces to build the boxes. Hello. You still have my chisel? Okay. 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 Okay, thanks. Bye. After edge banding, I drilled the pocket holes to assemble and cut the 1/4 inch plywood down for the drawer bottoms. Then I could whip these boxes together. The hardest part of this was actually just keeping the pieces labeled and organized since there were 4 different size drawer boxes to deal with. It was a bit confusing to keep them all straight. There are several ways to install drawer boxes, but my personal favorite way is to just place some 1/4 inch plywood scraps on the framing, slide the box on top, and then screw the slides to the sides. So I worked my way around installing all 9 drawers, and now it's finally starting to look like an actual dresser. So at the beginning of the project, I cut this piece for the dresser top and this piece for the dresser fronts. This piece should be more than enough to get all of the drawer fronts, and I should be able to cut them so that they're like continuous grain. You probably won't even be able to notice that they're continuous grain since I've got all the drawer dividers in between the drawer fronts. But whether you notice it or not, I'm gonna do it that way. So I'm just gonna rip 3 strips and then cut them to length. and just carefully label everything so I don't screw it up. After I carefully cut down and labeled my drawer fronts, I applied edge banding to the edges and then trimmed that thin leftover strip that I had from cutting down my 2x2s to fit onto each drawer front. Now, a couple of notes about that. You may be wondering why I'm adding this to only the sides of each drawer front, and again, it's just to tie in the design to the matching bed. I added these thin strips on the head and footboards, so I added this trim here to the drawer fronts. On the previous 6-drawer dresser, I used thinner trim, like what I actually used on the bed, but I always kind of felt that it was a little too small, so this time I went with thicker trim. Obviously, this isn't a perfect match to the bed, but this detail I think just kind of helps tie it all together. I attached each drawer front to the corresponding drawer box to make sure that I kept my continuous grain pattern. By the way, the little blue shims that I'm using here are part of the Craig drawer front mounting jig. They're handy to have, but any simple shim would work just as well. I removed each drawer box after adding the front to make staining it easier, which I will do in just a minute. And then I added the dresser top. I simply screwed this on using screws from the bottom side of the 2x2s. Now the last part was adding some optional trim to the side panels. For this, I glued 1x2s at the top and the bottom. Then I added some thin lattice trim, just like what's on the drawer fronts, to run vertically between them. Once the glue was dry, which was actually very quick in this summer heat, I applied Minwax weathered oak stain to the dresser and the drawer fronts. Then I followed up with a few coats of Minwax Helmsman Clear Coat and added the knobs. And with that, this 9-drawer dresser is ready to go. This is my first ever 9-drawer dresser build, although it's pretty much the same as a 6-drawer, just with a few extra dividers. Either way, I am really excited with how this turned out and how this design works with the other matching pieces of the set. I hope you enjoyed watching it come together and seeing a bit of the why behind this particular design. If you'd like to build one of your own, I've linked the printable building plans in the video description, and if you can't wait to see what's next on the channel, be sure to subscribe because there are a lot more projects to come soon. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!